Thank you all for being here. I am so excited for tonight. Tonight is going to be, I think, a really exciting evening. You all are going to be treated to our PASA or demographic data, and you're the first people to see it. I haven't even seen it, so I'm really excited that you're all going to be able to really jump into this journey with us, head first, feet first, and be ready to go and dive into our data, and I think that's going to help us make really important decisions together. So thrilled that you are here, glad that you're going to be able to hear it firsthand from our demographer, and thank you so much for being a part of this process and for dedicating your time and your evening to be here and be a part of this. So I'm going to hand it over to Lizzie and get us going.
Thank you so much. Well, good evening. Glad you're here tonight. It's good to see a room full of people. I love that. And the weather was nice. It was a lot easier to come when the weather's nice outside. So for those of you who were not here last time, I'm Lizzie Johnson, and I am the third-party facilitator for the committee. I was hired to help come in and help the district through this process, but also to make sure that you have an advocate in the room and that I am here for all of your concerns and your needs as we move forward in this initiative. And so this is my cell phone number and my email address. And if you need something during this process for the next few months while we're working together, please feel free to reach out to me. I already had some friends reach out from the last meeting, and so that was good. It's always nice to have good conversations, and some of you have some great insight because this is your home and you have good items to share with me as we move forward. So thank you very much for being here. All right, so last time we had your board president here to explain your charge, which is basically your instructions and why you're in this room and why you're going to continue to come back. And just a few items on this charge, keeps it very broad, very high level. You know, we're not picking out furniture for buildings, and we're not thinking about where the parking lot's going to be. Okay, we're going to stay out of those weeds. We're going to think about how many buildings we need in a certain amount of time and when they should come online to meet your growth and your demand here in the district. And so one of the bullets tonight that we're really going to hone in on is using facts and data to make informed decisions, because you're going to get a lot of facts and data tonight. Meeting two, I say, is like drinking from a fire hose almost, because when you have to start looking at all the numbers that PASA is going to give you, which is incredible. These demographers and their data, they're very smart humans, and they bring to the table a lot of knowledge. And then you're also going to hear a little bit about your facilities and the needs that they have. Now, we know in Dripping Springs, one of your biggest needs is just more space and more room for kids as they come. And so we're also going to look tonight at some of your current facilities and what their needs may be as they age. And as you know, just like in your home, when things get older, they need replacing. In your home, you probably have someone opening a cabinet or closing a door maybe 10, 20 times a day. But imagine a school with 700 to 800 children in it who are pushing on a door, opening a cabinet, doing this against the wall. They love to touch the walls in the elementary school. Have you ever noticed that's why they have tile on the walls there? And so you have to think about those things. It's relative to you as a homeowner or someone who lives in a property, but it's on a whole different scale. So we're going to have those conversations tonight. So we've gone over exactly what we're going to talk about. You know what your agenda is. If you were not here last time, you have your binder. It has meeting 1 slides, and now it has meeting 2. And if you were here, you probably brought your binder back. I hope you did. And you can put your meeting 2 slides in there. So as you may recall, we don't take breaks. If you need a break, go take it on your own. We're going to have a very efficient 2-hour meeting to make sure we get through all of these items. And like I said, it's going to be a lot of data. The leadership team is here. Everything you need is in front of you. We've got snacks and water back here in case you need that. And if you aren't familiar with this building, the restrooms are right outside this door. Okay, so just like last time, in a big room like this, it's hard when we have a presenter presenting and they are getting stopped and asked to answer questions and asked to, talk about what they're presenting. We're going to let them get through everything as they work through their presentation. And then at the end of their presentations, we're going to do table talk. And then we're going to do it a little different tonight. Instead of going table by table, we're just going to open the floor for questions. And so If you would prefer your table facilitator to ask the question, that's okay. Just tell your district person who's at the table to please ask this question. I'm sure they'll be fine doing that, but we'll engage in that when we get there. So just remember, we're gonna go and have some table talk after the presenters, just to give you some time to talk about what you learned and what you heard during the presentation. So tonight are two big items, and you can see as we're moving. Next week, we will be at the high school. We will not meet in this building, and we're gonna actually do a tour of that facility during the meeting, which is gonna be interesting. I know many of you have probably been in that facility, but there's probably some things you don't know about that facility that we want you to see. And then we'll come back together, we're gonna do some activities together that night, and do some group work as a committee. And then as you can see, we'll be at Rooster at meeting 4, some more group activities, another presentation from the district about the facility needs based on programming. And then meeting 5, we'll wrap this up and we'll put forth our recommendations to the school board in a nice box and put a bow on it as to when we feel like schools need to come online and what are some of the pressing needs in the district. Okay, so just a reminder, many of you came into this room tonight from a workplace or a home where you make decisions on your own. You are the decision maker. But in this room, we have to make collaborative decisions because all of you are in here for a reason and you represent a group of people in this community. So it's just something to think about. No big decisions tonight, but I just want you to keep remembering that we're not working in silos, we're working in a big group together and making the decisions about students because that's the most important reason why we are here. So just, one more thing. We've got to get through our presentations, we have to get through our committee meetings, and we have a process by which we do that. And at the end, we are going to funnel into a decision point. Okay, so we're excited. There's a lot to get to tonight, and so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stacy Tepera from PASA, and she is going to introduce her team, and they are going to go through the demographic slides. Please take notes, write your questions down, and let's let them get through everything, and then we'll do our table talk, and then we'll have time for Q&A.
Thank you very much. It is lovely to be back tonight. We have worked with Dripping Springs ISD for about 12 years, I think. And so we are thrilled to have just completed the most recent demographic study. And we will be sharing these results with you tonight. With me also is Angela Fritz. She's a demographer. She will be speaking in a few minutes. And also Tiffany Rogers is with us. She's our Director of Operations. She's keeping me under control tonight. So let's get started. As I mentioned, our firm has worked with Dripping Springs ISD and with districts all over Texas to do very in-depth studies of what changes are happening within your district on a really micro level, parcel by parcel. And so in putting together a lot of very different factors into a model for student growth in the future. So we're going to start first with some demographic trends. Over the past 10 years, I don't have enough hands, do I? Over the past 10 years, this district has gained about 3,400 students, growing from about a little over 5,000 students in 2013 to over 8,500 students as of this past PEIM snapshot date in October. That's a 66% growth over 10 years. And you guys know it, you feel it, but know that that's just the beginning. This is just the beginning of the high growth era in Dripping Springs ISD. One of the most basic primary demographic trends that we look at is birth rates. So we look at how many babies were born to mothers who live within zip codes within Dripping Springs ISD, and then we age those 5 years forward and line them up with the kindergarten enrollment for that year 5 years later. And so these two lines run generally parallel, but the reason, the difference between these lines represents the people who have moved into the district with a baby. That baby was born somewhere else, and they move in with a 2-year-old, and 3 years later that child enters kindergarten. So that's the difference in those lines, and they're not completely parallel because you have had an acceleration of people moving in over the past 2 decades. The important part of this graph is over on the far right. And so let's see, nope, we can't see a pointer. I'll just have to use my words. So the gray dotted line represents current, today, and so just before we get to the gray dotted line, you see a little dip in births and a little dip in kindergarten enrollment. This year's kindergarten is slightly lower than last year's kindergarten, and it's partially due to fewer births that happened within this district 5 years prior. But what's really important is what's on the right side of that gray line, and that's the babies that have been born in the past 4 years that haven't yet entered kindergarten. So that's a 40% increase over the past 4 years in births to mothers living in Dripping Springs ISD. So that already is going to result in an increased kindergarten enrollment over the next 4 years without any new homes being built, without anybody else moving in. So that gives us kind of a baseline. Now, before we can know where we're going, we need to know where we are and where we've been. So the first thing that we do in a study is to take a file from the district with every student's address, and we geocode those students on the map. And every student is represented by a dot on this map. In this case, the gray dots represent where every student lived 2 years ago, in fall of 21. The maroon dots represent all of the current students in fall of 23. Now the maroon dots are sort of on the bottom layer, and they're covered up by the 2-year-old dots. So the only time you see a maroon dot on this map is when a student lives somewhere that no one lived 2 years ago, right? And so the resolution is a little bit difficult to see the colors, but those clusters of maroon dots represent new sections of Headwaters, for example, or Bunker Ranch, or Parton Ranch down in the southeast. So this is our starting point. We have every student on the map as a dot, and we know where they live, and so that's our starting point to add on future growth. Because every student is a dot on the map, we develop ratios of students per occupied home that's unique to every subdivision. So some subdivisions have very high student densities or ratios of students per home, like Belterra and High Point have lots of students per home, about 0.74 and 0.87 respectively. But overall, district-wide, the district has about 0.5 students per home, 0.52 to be exact. This has been very stable over the past decade since we've been working with the district in single-family homes. In multifamily homes, there are about 0.2 students per unit, per apartment unit. And this has actually declined in this district, which is not unusual because of the new construction, the new apartment complexes that are being built in Ledgestone, for example, in Headwaters. The new complexes that you've seen going up in the last few years have more one-bedroom apartments that are not conducive to families with children, and they just have higher rents. And so we are seeing a decline in student density in apartment complexes, especially new ones, as they are under construction. So at this point, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Angela. She's going to talk a little bit about the economy and new housing construction, and then I'll come back and talk about how all these things get rolled into projected future students.
All right, good evening. It's good to be here with you all tonight. I get the fun job of trying to explain the macro context of the economy and the housing market as it relates to our projections, but everybody's probably maybe a little bit tired of hearing this, but it's relevant here for the context, especially for what you all are doing going forward. So we know in 2020 and 2021, during the pandemic, we know we had definitely a housing boom because of the historically low mortgage rates. Those low mortgage rates also work to drive down affordability of housing, right? As costs went up and people often got into bidding wars for houses. And collectively, that meant that a lot of new or potentially first-time home buyers might have been removed from the market. And also, we're seeing a result of that being that existing homeowners now are somewhat more reluctant to sell their homes or to re-enter the market as well. So we've seen a cooling housing market through 2022 and 2023 as the Fed has steadily increased the base interest rate. And the big question is, going into 2024, what is that going to look like? Is the rate eventually going to come down? Is it going to stabilize? But there is some measure of more stability and certainty in the market, and builders have had time to figure out how to incentivize first-time home buyers to purchase homes, as well as to adjust their products to the market, which is bringing new home buyers back on and increasing the proportion of new homes that are available on the market. So that's some contextual things to think about. The median home value here in Dripping Springs ISD in 2022 was $515,000. You can see the difference. This is just a chart to give you an idea of principal and interest only payments on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage at different interest rates. So you get a feel very quickly of the difference in cost for the same home potentially at those different mortgage rates. This second half of this equation that we talked about is not just new home sales and mortgage rates, but the hesitancy for folks who have existing homes potentially to list those homes for resale. There's not a lot of incentive right now to trade 3% or sub 3% mortgage for a much higher mortgage rate. So in looking at the multiple listing service data for Dripping Springs ISD, we see that in 2020, 2021, about 18% of existing homes were resold, that's estimated. And then the next year, about 12% of existing homes were resold. MLS data showed a 23% drop between those first 2 years and another 16% decline last year between 22 and 23. That's compared to a 23% drop overall in the Austin area. So we estimate just generally in Dripping Springs ISD that about 400 to 450 fewer homes were resold over the last year. And the reason why that's important is it gets at the regeneration in some of your existing neighborhoods and some of the factors Stacey will talk about here in a little bit, about potentially homeowners as maybe their kids age out of Dripping Springs ISD and age out of school, maybe staying in those homes versus selling to a younger family that might be looking to move in and then have kids re-enter the district. So it's just something to keep an eye on moving forward. We've seen that pattern in several of our school districts this year. This is an overview of your projected housing occupancies for the planning period. This is a 10-year planning period, and the most important thing about this slide to remember is this is not students. This is new housing occupancies. So this is not even necessarily new homes that are built. These are new homes that are built, sold, and then occupied, which is what we're projecting to get to students. So the majority of your projections are still single-family housing units at just over 10,600. This also includes some what we call build-to-rent or single-family build-to-rent units, and this is about 80% of your total projected housing for the planning period. You're looking at about 1,900 multifamily units, some age-restricted units. We project a student ratio of 0 in those age-restricted units, so it's important to know that they're there, but they're not affecting your student enrollment count. And then your total projected occupancies there are just over 13,000 for the 10-year period. I want to mention 2 quick things here. I'm not sure if you all have access to the full report and the map in front of you, but if and when you do, We project our housing occupancies by what we call kind of land use zones or units, and those are aggregated together in planning units. But the important part, I think, thing about that is we look at the entire district. We look at neighborhoods that are already developing. We look at neighborhoods that are planned, so there may be a plat for them. They may have filed for utilities through one of the utility companies. But we also analyze land use and try to project where things may occur in the future because of their location or because of other things in the area. So we're looking kind of at 3 different layers as we work through the 10-year period. You can find the details for each land use zone and each planning unit in the full report. You can see the projections by year, and you can also see the student ratio at which we're projecting each of those developments. Stacy gave you the average or the current student ratio for the district overall. You'll see the variation in the different neighborhoods and those projections on that report, and it corresponds with what we call a development overview map, where you can geographically see those things on a map as well. So you'll get a lot more detail here than we'll be able to talk about tonight. So let's hop right in to the single family projections. These are your developments with the largest 10-year impact in the district. These probably will not be a surprise to you, but your top 5 are Double Elk Ranch, which is projected to add nearly 1,600 units, starting in, my eyes are not good to look at my notes, about year 3 of the projection period there. They're projected to have just a little over 1,600 units at build out. Next you have Wild Ridge, which is projected to add 843 new occupancies in the next 10 years. Both of those we're projecting a student ratio of pretty close to the average right now for the district, 0.5 or 0.52. You have Heritage, which has just gotten started, just west of 12. We're projecting almost 600 occupancies there in total, 568 in the next 10 years. You also have Cannon Ranch, which is right here in central Dripping Springs as well. We're projecting occupancies as early as this school year starting there, 375 total in that development. And then Big Sky Ranch will continue to build out with their remaining 337 units in the planning period. And some of your other developments that are towards the latter part of their build out will continue to build out as well. They just don't rank towards the top anymore because they're already being occupied, including Headwaters, which has about 315 units total left to build out that are projected. Parton Ranch with 273, Calaterra with 136, and then Arrowhead Ranch is a big one that really just finished building out this last school year. Geographically, this is where those major developments are located in the district. Of course, along 290, really a lot in denser central kind of Dripping Springs ISD for the ones we mentioned, as well as up 12 and south on 12 and Gaynor Road as well. This chart also includes some of those probable future locations we talked about. So there may not be anything known right now, but we think that eventually those certain land use areas lend themselves within the planning period for potential development. You'll see in the Spear et al. Tract because of that location as an example, and then K, a Boarding Partners tract, which is on 290. So just to point out a couple that may not be under development or actively planned, but potentially could affect the 10-year projections there. This next series of heat maps is a progressive kind of aggregation over the 10-year planning period. So your first map on your left is just your year 1 housing projections, and these are by planning unit. So your planning units are aggregated together into attendance zones, which Stacey will talk about here in a little bit. But your first map just shows you the impact of the projections on year 1. Your second map on the top is years 1 through 4. Then you've got aggregated years 1 through 7 and years 1 through 10, so you can kind of see how that development spreads geographically across the district over the 10-year planning period. Multifamily right now is not of huge impact on the district. That is changing a little bit. You do have more potential future developments as development towards 290 kind of builds out. This slide looks at multifamily and rental projections, or some of those build-to-rent units combined. So we are projecting almost 2,700 rental occupancies over the next 10 years. There are 4 developments that are actively under construction or leasing up right now. This amounts to about 20% of your total projected housing if you add those build-to-rent and multifamily units together. But it's important to remember, because of the student ratio that Stacy talked about earlier, that does not equal a similar proportion of students. So you're looking at less than 13% of your students projected from new housing from these types of units. We are projecting about 1,000 units to be added in the next 5 years from these. Your leasing up or under construction complexes are listed here, and you can see that 2 of those are 55 plus or age restricted, age targeted developments as well, with the local and Lookout being the 2 kind of general population, and for lack of a better term, multifamily developments under construction now. This is geographically where those fall within the district, no surprise here, 290 and 12. And again, you see these same developments here, your multifamily. And then the built-to-rent developments are the New Growth development, which is just south of 290, and potentially the Village Grove development, which is also south of 290. And those are both planned developments. So overall, your housing occupancies over the 10-year projection period are split out here year by type. And you can see that we started just over basically 700 single-family projections in year 1 and increased steadily up to almost 1,340 across the planning period. And that's as those larger existing developments that we talked about build out and are replaced by the newer developments we mentioned earlier that haven't started yet, like Double L, Wild Ridge, Cannon Ranch, and some of those also. And with that, I'm gonna hand it back to Stacy to talk about students.
You've heard a lot of information. You've been very patient. We are going to summarize a little bit about what you have heard as far as all of the different factors that go into these projections. There are many factors that provide push and pull pressures on enrollment growth. And for example, I told you about birth rates. There was a little dip in birth rate between 6 and 5 years ago that resulted in a smaller kindergarten class this year. But then I also told you that after that and since that has been a 40% increase in birth rates. So that will give a push factor towards increasing kindergarten enrollment in the next 4 years. That incoming kindergarten class size is important because it continues to impact enrollment growth over the next 13 years as that class, it's either big or small, ages through the system. So it has a continuing impact. Regeneration of homes with young families, with students, is always both a push and pull effect on enrollment. Angela mentioned how mortgage rates have been so high that the regeneration within existing homes we have found in many of our client districts has just not happened as much this year as it has in the past. And that means those empty nesters that have a 2.5% mortgage, why would they move if they didn't have to and undertake a 7% mortgage instead? And so they are not moving out of their homes as much this year as they have in the past, freeing those homes up to be bought by families with kids. So in many cases, we have seen less regeneration of those existing homes, those neighborhoods that are established. That's not to say that it's a trend, it's just what has happened in the past year because of mortgage rates. But we have to watch that and project for it as well. The aging of the current students, of course, there are always bulges in grade levels as kids age through the system. There was a bulge in a cohort of about 3 or 4 classes that was really big that has recently graduated. And so that big cohort has been followed right now by a smaller cohort that is in high school right now. And I just told you that as those high school kids graduate, they will be replaced by bigger and bigger incoming kindergarten classes. So that is another push-pull. The smaller graduating classes and the larger incoming kindergarten classes. But above and beyond all of this, blowing all of this out of the water, is the new housing, which is the massive push in enrollment growth. And so we are projecting that about between 300 and 600 students per year will be added to this district due to new housing construction. So we develop 3 scenarios of growth: a low, moderate, and high growth scenario. Now, the moderate growth scenario is what we consider the most likely. This moderate growth scenario is what we have developed as our primary thoughts on what is most likely to happen over the next 10 years. There are thousands of factors that will change over the next 10 years. And so we have to bracket in that reality with some kind of a reasonable bracket, a low growth and a high growth scenario. So under the moderate growth scenario, we are projecting that Dripping Springs will grow from the 8,500 students currently to about 15,500 in 10 years. That is a big acceleration over the past growth. You think that 3,400 students you gained over the past decade was a lot, but now we're projecting about twice that in the next decade, based on all of this new housing that Angela just talked about. Now, a low growth scenario is also reasonable and possible if Double L and Gateway Village and Wildridge don't get moving as quickly as we think they will and as they think they will. That could delay that growth, that student enrollment growth. Likewise, the wastewater issues, if the lawsuit does not get resolved, then that could lead to a more low growth scenario. But on the flip side of that, if the kindergarten class grows a whole lot more, well, then that will impact cumulatively year after year to influence more of a high growth scenario. Or likewise, if the housing construction ramps up more than we expected, that could show us a high growth scenario. But what's really important for long-range planning, at least for this committee and for the facilities people in the district, is not just the total number of students, but where those students are going to live. So this is another heat map that shows planning units in red that are projected to gain the most elementary students over the next 10 years. So you see these hot spots in the same general regions that you saw the new housing growth, Double L and Big Sky and Wildridge and Gateway Village, all there together at the northeast quadrant of 12 and 290, as well as Calaterra and Headwaters. But what does that mean as far as elementary schools? So where are those new kids going to show up at the schools? Well, these green lines are the elementary attendance zone boundaries. So you can see that the majority of those hot spots, those dark red areas, are located in Dripping Springs Elementary and Walnut Springs Elementary. There's some growth in the others, but Dripping and Walnut definitely will be the recipients of the bulk of that growth. How does that translate into total number of students? Well, we've got about 1,200 students projected to be added over the next 10 years in Walnut Springs, and about 1,400 students over the next 10 years to be added to Dripping Springs Elementary. So, yeah, let's just let that sink in for a minute. In addition to the students already at both of those schools, we have about 1,400 coming to Dripping and about 1,200 coming to Walnut. So how does that relate to the existing capacity? How much capacity is there to accommodate the current and projected future students? These numbers, this will probably be the slide that you go back to the most in your discussions. This illustrates the number of projected resident students projected to live in each attendance zone over the next 10 years. Now, there's the column over at the right that's net transfers. That is because not everybody who lives in Dripping Springs Elementary attends Dripping Springs Elementary. There's some transfers for various reasons. but we are demographers, so we project where people are going to live, and we just have to assume that those transfers will be similar, or you can make that assumption, or the district can talk about if they're going to move some programs or whatever. But we are demographers, so we look at resident students. So the yellow cells highlight the areas in which the projected resident student population exceeds the capacity of the school by 120%. And we, as a third-party consultant, use that 120% threshold as one way to measure when that school just can't accommodate another portable, for example, or when the core capacity will not be able to handle the additional students. There are many things that go into making a decision about when a new school is needed. This is one of them, and this is the one that we use because we're into the numbers of students. It's up to this committee and the district to weigh this as one of the many factors and to use this as a starting point for deciding when the next school or schools are going to be needed. So the first step, of course, is the opening of elementary 6. And that will be in fall of 25. That will be the first step in taking into account this overcrowding at Dripping and Walnut, but it's certainly not the end. So based on the 120% utilization, we estimate that 2 more elementary schools will be needed through about 2029 or 2030. And the reason I say approximately is because the attendance zones that the board will approve for fall of 2025 with the opening of elementary 6. However the district and the board decides to draw those attendance zones, that will determine the timing for the need for elementary 7, depending on how much rezoning happens among the existing schools. And so there's no way we can predict that, so we say sometime around 27, 28, 29, or 30, 2 additional elementary schools will be needed. Let's move on to middle school. And all of those hot spots that you saw before, almost all of them are located in Dripping Springs Middle School attendance zone. So we're projecting over 1,500 middle school students to be added into the current Dripping Springs Middle School. That's another whole middle school, plus some, right? Middle schools have a capacity of about 1,200 students. So, again, we're looking at yellow means the 120% capacity. Sycamore Springs is planned for an expansion to be finished in 2025. And so that will help the overcrowding at Sycamore. But then by about 2028 is when we project Dripping Springs Middle to reach that threshold of 120%. So again, this can be your starting point for deciding when that next middle school 3 could be necessary. And finally, at the high school level. Currently, or as of the PEAM snapshot date in October, there were almost 2,500 high school students at Dripping Springs High School. We are projecting, based on all of these things that we've talked about, that by the fall of 27, there will be over 3,000 high school students in Dripping Springs ISD. And so that is the 120% threshold for Dripping Springs High School. But again, and especially at the high school level, there are so many other things that impact the timing of opening a high school. Every district and every high school has a different tolerance for overcrowding. How many can we really squeeze in before it's just not bearable? That's different for every population and every building, every school. But you also need to postpone the opening of a school long enough that you have 2 well-utilized schools. If you were to open a new school when the first school reaches 100%, then the next year you'll have 2 50% utilized schools. And that's not financially efficient. So there's a balance between how many people can you squeeze into Dripping Springs High School versus opening up a second high school that's underutilized in the first few years. You also need to keep in mind that the board will likely, in most cases, will approve a grandfathering policy that allows juniors and seniors or some population of students to remain at Dripping Springs High School, even if their neighborhood is zoned to the new school. So you have to open the high school early enough that there's still room for those grandfathered students at Dripping Springs High School. And then there's always, finances, of course, and bond elections and funding and concurrent construction projects going on at the same time in the district. And so all of those things will go into your recommendation and ultimately the board's decision about when to open these next facilities. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lizzie.
Okay, so let's take about 10 minutes. The PASA team's going to walk the floors and answer sidebar questions. We'll have leadership walk too. Take about 10 minutes to talk to the table, and then we'll do an open forum for Q&A.
Okay, I'm gonna bring us back together in the big group. So we've had about 11 minutes to talk. Now, please note that at every table there's a microphone, okay? You have to use the microphone when you ask a question. Okay, if you can hear me, if you'll raise your hand, just like this. Cool, thanks. So we have to use the mic because we are filming, recording, and that way everybody can hear us. So I'm going to give this mic back to our experts, and as we ask questions, they will use this mic, and table 2 has a regular mic that they will use. So just make sure you press the button, okay? All right, so let's start.
I'm going to start up in this front area. Do we have any questions over here in this area? Question, comment? Go for it.
We acknowledge that our questions can't be answered this evening.
Okay.
How do we capture homeschool and charter school students, and how do we predict how that may impact? Because we know there are multiple around here. Where will teachers live? Because a single teacher cannot afford a $500,000 home. Not to mention paraprofessional staff, bus drivers, child nutrition workers. We started talking about housing grants and maybe some community partnerships. And then, does this demographic data change? I know she mentioned the wastewater lawsuit. What other things impact the demographic data that are taken into account, which I think you mentioned during the larger report, but that's what our dialogue centered around.
Can you speak to that last part, and then I might have our superintendent speak to the first part?
Well, I can certainly speak to the very first part, which is charter schools. That is one of the ways that we shortened this presentation was to leave out our study of charter schools and private schools. But that was included in this study, and we get data from TEA about how many students live in Dripping Springs ISD that attend charter schools. And we look at those trends over time, and it is insignificant in this district. It's about, as I recall, about 100 students or so that are attending charter schools. However, it's really important that as we do every study every 2 years or so, that we continue to look for new charter schools moving in, because when a system expands and opens a new campus, if it were to be located close to Dripping Springs ISD, it would have an immediate and significant impact on enrollment. And so we keep an eye on that, even between studies, and call our clients and say, Dr. Morris-Gooms, you got some problems coming. You might see a decline in elementary enrollment at this school in the year 25 because XYZ charter system is planning to open a new campus.
And I'm gonna take this, post it, so we can answer those, get more data on the other for y'all. And I'm gonna do this mic.
Just so y'all are aware, because not everybody knows a lot about charters. You hear that word and you're like, I think I know what that is. But remember, the school district doesn't have any say over whether a charter school comes into your district or not. That's the state. So the school district does not have, they don't get to approve that.
Okay. We had talked a little bit about, we feel like we're gonna need campuses, but why would people be opposed? More so the timing, I think, and looking at, what we looked at was looking at the total, once you get to 120, of adding up all the schools, and then, what would be that discussion, acknowledging we would have to adjust lines, which is going to cause other issues, acknowledging transportation, you might have to split streets in the same neighborhood, which causes another issue. And so we just started looking at why would people be opposed to the timing of what they presented here tonight, and the different things like that. So I don't know that we really had a question as much as we were just kind of talking through, we feel like we do need campuses, but, what can we talk through as far as the timing piece of it?
Right. And at the next meeting, that's gonna be an activity that all of you are gonna do together about when new schools should come online, to think about the demographics and the growth. Thank you. Anybody over here? Okay.
So, looking at all the data, obviously you can see like the west side has this exponential planned growth. The thing that's concerning that I wanted to ask if you took into account is in that kind of area, there are still a lot of multiple parcels of large land that are privately held. Did y'all account for, okay, if this 500-acre ranch gets sold, then maybe 1,500 or 300 or however many hundreds of school or houses could be built there, and what that looks like as well?
Sure, so that's one of the larger variables we have to look at in our land use analysis, and part of the housing projections process is trying to understand what the market can absorb also. And a third variable, and part of that is infrastructure, which the first table kind of got at. So to answer your question succinctly, yes, we look at that. The follow-on question is, could that happen within the 10 years? So in our land use analysis, we tried to talk to as many people as possible. In a district the size of Dripping Springs, we can't necessarily go talk to every single independent landowner. We talked to the city, we talked to the school district, we talked to the utility providers. The school district now has a broker who we spoke with as well, who has some insights into land. And if we have particular landowners that we're able to speak with, we do. So we try to take that into consideration, but oftentimes the utilities dictates the density on those tracts. And most of those tracts, as you get further away from the city's utility system and West Travis County PUA, won't be able to be developed currently at the same density as the stuff internally, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, sorry, I forgot, guys. Follow on to your answer previously about the charter schools, does that also include homeschool?
We currently do not have a way to systemically track homeschool students because they're not required to register with TEA. They're not monitored by TEA. So no, we do not include homeschool students. We do analyze private school enrollment.
I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Christy was saying. Does the ISD have any input or any say in how many units can be built in a development? None at all. So the county can just, as many permits as possible.
You got it. Any questions over here? Yes, ma'am, you got the mic, great. Yes, ma'am. There you go.
So, in the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about how much of a high growth district we are right now. And I was just curious to know, is there, generally speaking, when you look at other districts that you've worked with in prior years, how long does it take for a district to be considered high growth and then flatten and then decline? So like Austin ISD is in a decline right now, meaning, people have lived there, raised their children, children have outgrown or graduated high school, and those parents are still living in those homes, meaning there's no more kids going into those schools. So how long does that process generally take?
So you've asked a couple of different questions embedded in that one. So I think the last part of your question was more about, on a neighborhood basis, if houses were built all within a certain decade, how long does it take for them to begin to regenerate with younger families? And it's different for every neighborhood. Sometimes those empty nesters will move out immediately, and sometimes they'll stay put. As one superintendent said 15 years ago, that neighborhood, they're going to be buried in their backyards. They are not leaving for any reason. So in general, maybe about 30 years or so is the age of homes that will then really begin to regenerate with younger children. However, that will never cause the same amount of growth that happens when new houses are built. And so the other part of your question was, when will a district stop growing and level off? And that answer is when it reaches build out. And in Dripping Springs ISD, you are a long, long way from build out. That is not to be assessed in this bond, the next bond, or even the next.
Yes, ma'am. Do you have a mic?
Our question was, as these communities continue to buy the big parcels and the developers are building these communities and planning them, is there a plan with the developments, the city, the school district, and whoever needs to be a part of those plans for the developers to include property at a reasonable rate for the school district to put in schools like number 6 going in at Headwaters?
Okay, Dr. Morse-Coots, do you want to speak to that, or I'm going to bring you the microphone.
We get asked that a lot. Urban districts can do that because they can put that within their city guidelines. Our district is mostly an ETJ, so when you think about Dripping Springs, everything being sold is really outside of their city's control because there's not a lot of land within the city that is really impacting us. It's all in the ETJ, which doesn't give them that same power to dictate that kind of requirement.
All right, we got time for one more. Is there one more question?
So one of the things I think, if you've been here for some of our previous bonds and things that come up when we talk about new schools, is also zoning. So did you guys look at all, once elementary 6, if it's going to be 850 capacity, obviously it's a little bit more in the middle of town. Right now, Walnut's district stretches quite far east, whereas Sycamore continues, if you look at the spread, to always be much lower. So, did you look at all at one, what the influx of the 850 at the elementary level will do for Headwaters and just that center area, but then also at what point, if we made Sycamore more at capacity, would we alleviate the 120 for sure with Walnut, which is brand new?
Sure, it's a logical question, and that will be up to the decision makers during the next zoning process with the opening of the Headwaters School. So that's not my decision to make.
One, we have to remember Walnut isn't a brand new campus. So Walnut for us is a replacement campus. So it's not new and didn't add another additional 50 capacity for our district. So that's one piece of that. I think the other piece is just district-wide. Part of what attendance zoning looks at is that total functional capacity. So if you're looking at 2 different times in that time frame that you had up there, Dr. Tapera, then we are 2 times where we are 850 or more over our total district capacity. So we can take into account, I think, as y'all are doing the planning activity, is it next week?
Well, the next meeting.
At the next meeting, next week. At the next meeting, when y'all look at that planning activity, you'll be able to look at, here's 850 added to the total district enrollment, and you can kind of assume across the district if you stacked every campus, knowing that that never works out with attendance zoning. You can't perfectly tell a family where to move in, but you can make that assumption at your table, and that'll give you some idea of what that remaining capacity is for that next campus, and then that'll give you some idea of that buffer. So I think there's
And we'll have lots more on that next month when we get together at the high school. Dr. Tapera and her team, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Great job, great information. And so at this time, we are that's so nice of you. Okay, great. So at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to our friend from TASB, and Amber is going to go through a facility needs assessment. Now, sometimes in school districts, they hire an architect or a general contractor, people of that nature. Your district's moving so fast that they, want to make this very third party, very neutral. So making sure you find the right things that need to be assessed and the right items that need to come to the forefront. So they've hired a third party to come in and do the assessment over a few campuses that we're going to talk about, and we're going to keep talking about these campuses as we continue to meet. So this is not anything about new build. Now this is about existing buildings that you have in the district that have current needs and will continue to have needs.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So, as she stated, I'm with TASB Facility Services. I have been a part of that department within that organization since 2014. Started out working with facilities, doing a lot of regulatory stuff, state, federal, local regulations, and I've been assessing facilities for districts since 2017. I grew up in Round Rock, Texas, so I'm not too far from here, and I actually had my dad's side of his family are from Dripping Springs, so very excited to be in the community, see the growth, see the facilities, and be a part of this process. So this is what we're going to be doing today. These are some of the topics that we're going to review, and it is going to be very high level, so keep in mind any questions that you have in the future. During the Q&A, I may get Clint to tag in if there's district-specific questions pertaining to their facilities. So when we do a facility assessment, these are the categories that we look at. Within each of these categories, there are items, there are finishes, there are building systems, there are sites. There's a lot of different components that go into a facility assessment. We are not just walking into a building and saying, yep, that looks good. So within the site, these are all the items that we look at within that category. Some of these will show up in several categories, like your ADA, which is your accessibility. Those are federal regulations that Texas took and made even more strict not too long ago, so they do impact quite a few different categories. Your systems and components are some of your big systems, like your roofs, your flooring, drinking fountains, especially your mechanical, which is your HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and your data is going to be your technology infrastructure, which is very impactful for districts, especially the way that learning is conducted in classrooms. Safety and security is a big one that's come up a lot, especially recently in legislation. So that is something that we look at on a high level, and as you can see, ADA is another one of those that pops up in yet another category. And then you have your support spaces that we look at. A lot of these support spaces and even your classrooms, we do look at the TEA regulations. They do have some size mandates that dictate how big these spaces need to be depending on the enrollment of a campus and then the age of the students at that campus. So pre-K through first grade are going to have different parameters than your high school students. Educational adequacy, again, some of those TEA standards are impactful to these categories, and these are going to be anything from your classrooms, your library, your athletic spaces, any of your art, CTEs, computer labs, which not too many campuses have computer labs anymore. So few categories that we're going to touch on before I go into the findings. These are ones that may come up as you are participating in this process and as you talk about the facilities themselves. So facility grading, this is how we look at a campus and how we rate it. We base a lot of our recommendations on best practice. For instance, HVAC systems, those have a recommended lifespan of about 15 years. So when an HVAC system starts to get to that age, we base a recommendation on the best practice to replace after 15 years so that you don't have issues with it. That is a best practice. That doesn't mean that the system is broken. That's how we assess and make our recommendations. We compare everything to like new. So we don't slice it very, very thin. We do good, fair, and poor, and we are comparing to new. So when we are looking at your finishes, which is your floors, your walls, and your ceilings, we're looking at those and assessing them from the stance of how does this fare compare to something that is brand new? If it's doing pretty good, then we're gonna grade it as fair. If things are falling apart, we're gonna say it's poor and you probably need to replace. Pricing, you all will not necessarily go into pricing, but when we do an assessment, we do give pricing to a district for replacement of items. Anything from individual floor tiles, ceiling tiles, walls, HVAC units, and all of those pricing are based on RS Means. RS Means is a national construction pricing system that is, I think there's, when I checked, about 30,000 individuals, professional individuals that contribute to the pricing of that system throughout the year to keep it current, and they do adjust it regionally. So what prices a district would pay in Texas are going to be different than a district would pay in California or in New York. So they do account for that. And there's 92,000 individual line items within the RS Means system that are updated throughout the year so that those prices do reflect what the industry standards are at that time. Condition budget is a term that we'll get to later. It is something that is going to be the total cost of any recommended renovations or replacements. A replacement budget is what it would cost to replace the exact square footage with brand new square footage. So let's see, and then Facility Condition Index, FCI, is a term that comes up a lot in facility assessments, and it's when you take that condition budget, your renovation replacement cost, and you divide it by your replacement budget, and that is going to essentially, with your cost to repair divided by your cost to replace. And when you start getting a facility that the cost to renovate or replace systems, components, finishes, as it gets closer to 100%, that means that the cost to renovate, replace, maintain, etc. is going to start outpacing what it would cost to replace it outright. That is something that a district keeps in mind as they make decisions for their facilities, how long to keep them, how long to maintain them, renovate, etc., moving forward versus replace. You will have functional capacity, which is how much square footage is devoted to educational courses and how much of that facility is utilized. You're taking the capacity divided by the enrollment. So how much facility square footage that is devoted to educational courses and how many students you have that need to fit into those spaces, and that's how you get your utilization. The demographic study touched on this a little bit for some of your campuses that are already at or getting to 120% utilization. So I will touch on some of the utilization at this time for the campuses we're going to talk about today, which are going to be these 4 campuses. So Rooster Springs Elementary was built in 2007. It has a square footage of about 110,000 square feet. The replacement cost, which again, this is to replace that current square footage, 110,000 square feet with 110,000 square feet of brand new building, in today's construction industry would be around $61 million. The recommended renovations, replacements, etc., at this time that we assessed came to around 11 million. That FCI, which is again your condition divided by your replacement, is around 21% for this facility, which is pretty average for a facility that is nearing the 20-year mark. The utilization of this campus, again, what you have in terms of educational space versus the number of students that are actually enrolled in that campus is around 89% at this facility. So some of the main projects that we assessed and made recommendations on were HVAC systems. All of these systems were installed in 2007 when the campus was new, so they are all hitting or have passed that 15-year mark. Again, best practice doesn't mean that those systems are broken or they're damaged or they're not functioning properly. Best practice is to replace those once they hit that 15-year mark. Lighting, industry standard now is LED lighting, both from how it impacts the students to how it lights the areas. So recommendations for upgrading interior and exterior with LED lighting. Finishes, this is your floor, walls, and ceilings. Those are starting to see the wear and tear from the students. A facility with hundreds of little kids is going to have some impacts at the end of the day. As Lizzie said, for some reason they really love running their hands down the wall as they're walking, so those finishes take the brunt of the burden from those people being in and out of those facilities all day. Roofs and gutters, there are not only some replacements that have been recommended, some renovations, etc., but also just some general manufacturer recommended maintenance. Parking and drives, this is to reseal, patch, and essentially top coat the parking and drives and then restripe. The more maintenance you do to parking lots, the better they hold up throughout the years, and it keeps you from having to outright dig them all up and replace them completely, which of course, the further you get, or the closer you get to outright replacement, the more expensive something gets. And then some updates to the playground areas. You do have some pictures for some of these projects. The district was nice enough to print these in color for everybody. So the first one is just the parking and the drives. Still in fairly good condition, but you are starting to see some cracks, some wear and tear, and the longer those go unaddressed, the more significant that damage does get. Next slide is of some of the roofing systems, the gutters, downspouts. As you can see, there's a little bit of ponding, some wear and tear to the roof systems, but then the gutters, we would make recommendations based on if you are going to address one system, the logical step is to recommend addressing any issues with adjacent systems as well. If recommendation is to replace electrical and lighting, good practice or best practice is to also think about what condition your ceiling tiles or ceiling finishes are in and address those at the same time. Same with roof systems. Logical adjacent systems to address during any upgrades, replacement, renovation, repairs, etc. are your gutters and downspouts. Just a few pictures of some of the finishes. Need some painting, some patchwork. Floor tiles starting to crack in quite a few places, and then ceiling tiles showing their wear with some leaks that have either occurred from roofs or from the plumbing above the ceiling. And then some pictures of the playground. There are some wear and tear starting to show on some of the playgrounds, and then also recommendations for canopies. Those, especially in Texas, help with the longevity of these spaces. And since they are spaces that kids use all day, every day, we do put some importance on them.
Amber,
All
you're
right.
moving so well, I don't want to stop you. So
Oh, okay.
let's just keep going and
Perfect.
finish up the last two, and then we'll do our tabletop.
Okay.
Great.
All right, and then the next campus we'll look at is Dripping Springs High School. So this one was originally built in 1996. It used to be Dripping Springs Middle School before the high school transitioned to that facility. And then it's had several rounds of renovations and additions, the most recent in 2020. Square footage is around 450,000 square feet, so it is a very large facility. It is spread out over quite a few acres. Right now, to replace that square footage outright with brand new is around $288 million. Construction pricing right now is not cheap, so the condition budget for doing upgrades, repairs, renovations is around $40 million, which is significantly less than to replace it outright. The facility condition index is right around 18%. Again, right in that average spot for a facility that is that age. Capacity is right around 2,500. Enrollment right around 2,484. So this campus is getting full. It is getting near capacity, and will eventually need additional space. Some of the projects that were noted for this facility, again, HVAC, and I actually have an edit for everybody, I apologize. Right now, the district has around 268 individual units at that facility. Around 115 are already past 15 years old, and we look at HVAC systems from a tonnage standpoint, and some of the much larger HVAC units, especially the chillers, have aged past. So about 85% of that campus's cooling capacity has exceeded the 15-year age mark. So that's a lot of units that you don't want anything to happen to, especially in Texas, especially that time when school starts and it is very hot. So I apologize that didn't get updated. If anyone needs me to repeat that, I'm happy to. And then lighting, again, best practice to update all of the systems units to LED. Finishes, floors, walls, ceilings. Restrooms, a lot of the fixtures and accessories are damaged, maybe non-functioning. Some of them don't meet ADA standards. Doors and windows, there are some of the interior doors and frames that need to be replaced. And then there are some exterior window units that are getting closer to that 30-year mark. And just like a lot of other systems and components, there is a recommended lifespan that you can get out of those. A majority of the windows at that campus have been replaced fairly recently. Parking and drives, again, the resealing, top coat, patch, restriping, and then the roofing systems. So the roofing replacement was actually included in the 2023 bond. So this is already something that is currently being addressed. But I bring it up now because this is one of the things that we assessed and noted in our assessment. So these are pictures of some of those larger units. These are the chiller units. They are very expensive to replace, and depending on the brand, some of these units can take anywhere from 8 months to over a year to get. That's a very long time when you have a facility that relies on that unit to heat, cool, etc. These are some of the finishes, door frames. I apologize, these pictures are a little bit harder to see, that need replacing just from general wear and tear. Some of the restrooms, stalls, door frames that have worn down. You can't see it on this one, but the restroom stall has been carved into and has some choice words in it. Let's see. Oh, there it goes. Some additional roof photos. Again, these are already being addressed, but you can see that due to the degradation of the roof systems, it has impacted the interior finishes. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Now, middle schools, for the middle schools, we are just focusing on the bleacher and press box, and then the track and turf. So these are items that at Dripping Springs Middle School and Sycamore Middle School need some attention. So this is the bleachers and press box at Dripping Springs Middle School. At this time, it is in good condition, but it does need some maintenance. The press box, it needs some maintenance as well, and some items outright replaced. These are the tracks at Dripping Springs Middle School and Sycamore. The tracks typically have, remind me again, Clint, an 8-year life cycle from the kind of wear and tear that they get, and they're also exposed to the elements 360 days a year. So the lifespan for these systems is not terribly long, but the more damage they get, the harder it is to just do repairs or maintenance on them. I keep forgetting where I need to point. Okay, so that being said, I know we'll do some Q&A at this time. This is my contact information. If anyone does have any questions, I'll coordinate with Clint at the district if there's more in-depth questions. But I'll leave that up there and then
Great.
questions.
Take about 10 to 12 minutes, talk at your table. We'll be moving around, answering sidebar questions, and then we'll do a big forum Q&A. Okay?
Bring us back together as a big group. All right, thank you. So we're going to do the same process as before. Every table has a mic. I've got yours. Okay, if you can hear me, if you'll just give me a thumbs up. All right, cool, thanks. All right, so every table has a mic. We're going to do the same process. I'm just going to kind of work around the room and see who has questions, and then we'll go from there. And Amber and Clint are going to help us get answers to those questions, okay?
So our main focus was around the HVAC units, assuming those things are the most expensive. And we were just wondering, in these old units, how significant the cost savings were as far as like energy efficiency, if any of that was taken into account for the school's just general operating budgets.
Yeah, so the energy efficiency and long-term savings is certainly something that from the pure assessment standpoint, they're just looking at the age and the performance and when it's due for replacement. When we start looking at large HVAC projects and what we might do at Dripping Springs High School or Rooster Springs Elementary is part of that analysis would be, yes, this is going to be X millions of dollars, but that new system is going to be 20% more efficient than the current system, so there's a long-term payback. In addition to improved operation, there's also an improved efficiency, and then we can look at long-term dollar amount associated with that and like what the payback would be. If that answers the question.
Over here, do you have any questions over here? Yes, ma'am. Well, just ask him. Okay. It's on. Oh, wait, it was on. Now it's on.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Why did we choose to focus on these facilities specifically, and did everything that DSES needs get covered in the last bond? I can stop there because that's only one of.
So I will speak to part of that and then I'll hand it off to Clint. So facilities, they have this timeline that around 20 years is when a lot of the major systems, components, finishes, they've been through the gamut. And that is really when you need to start doing your renovations, your upgrades, your replacements, because those things are going to protect the core structure of your building and the integrity of your facility to get it to the 50, 60, 70-year age mark. So part of some of the recommendations that are made, especially at these two facilities, are because they are hitting that 20-year age mark. So that's why we chose to focus on those facilities.
And I can't remember the rest of your question.
And then along with that of like looking at a DSC and a DSMS, so we go back to bond planning from the 2023 bond, we knew that DSE and DSMS were our oldest facilities, and we were having some of those same discussions early in that process that we're having tonight, knowing that we needed to address all of those major systems at those two campuses. And so to answer the first part of that question, which was, yes, all of the facility assessment issues at DSE and DSMS are being addressed in the 2023 bond package. But then even going back to when we were discussing what all to include in that 2023 bond, part of those conversations about what we're talking about tonight was, okay, well, the next round of buildings that will be approaching that 20-year mark or approaching that age of when we need to replace those major systems would be Rooster Springs Elementary and the high school.
Great. All right. Anybody back here? Oh, hold on. We've got one over here. We gotta use the mic. Yes, sir. Okay, it's on.
So one of the questions we had was, has the district ever considered doing performance electric contracting arrangements?
Performance contracts?
Yeah.
We have been approached and we've discussed and looked at the kind of the payback, and it just this district and I was in Leander before I was in this district, kind of had the same philosophy, which is we would first make efforts to address these types of improvements through the bond program.
And then we had one other question. Were all the safety and security considerations for all of our campuses covered in prior bond packages? And it didn't look like there was anything in what was presented today that related to safety and security.
Yes, and that actually came up at this table when we were walking around as well. And so, yes, all of the current safety and security needs across the district are addressed. Now, that doesn't mean something unforeseen doesn't come up over the next few years, but as we know it today, all of the current to meet, and again, a lot of things changed over the last couple of years in terms of safety and security requirements. And so what we have included in the 2023 bond, along with some grant funds that are available, will address all of the current safety and security needs.
Okay, yes, sir.
Our question was kind of geared towards around some of the pictures that we see here. We know it's obviously it's not all the fixes that need to be, need to be taking place at either of these facilities, but we noticed a lot of it seems to be kind of cosmetic as opposed to functional. There's definitely some functional things that we noticed, but there's some cosmetic issues that we think maybe could be alleviated with just standard maintenance. Is the current budget for any of these items, do they include maybe additional personnel for maintenance? I don't know how many maintenance personnel are at each school, if any. I know I obviously I see janitorial, but in terms of maintenance, do we have key personnel at any of these schools?
So yeah, we do have key maintenance personnel that do repairs across the district. And again, when TASB comes in and does a facility assessment, they're not just identifying things that are automatically to be considered for a future bond. Some of these things absolutely that are cosmetic, or some of them that are below a certain dollar threshold. For instance, some of the things that, some of the improvements that need to be made on the DSMS press box, we'll budget that we'll attempt to budget that within our regular operating budget and make some of those, what I would say, smaller repairs. They may look significant in terms of the pictures, but it's something that we can do within our operating budget.
As far as just the district's plan or the facilities?
When you look at those pictures and you see cosmetic, it looks cosmetic, right? You know, the edges of doors and things like that.
Yes.
Explain how when you work on those, how
So when we make our recommendations, when we do our assessment, I think the final product that we give to the district, there's around 300 individual line items with varying degrees of how they need to replace it, what degree of attention it needs, from none to minor to moderate to severe to this needs to be replaced. And depending on the percentage of that system within that building, and then the percentage of the degree of attention it needs, it will ultimately be up to the district to decide collectively if that is something that can be addressed realistically by maintenance, or that needs to be part of a larger project. One thing that with an assessment, again, being strategic when you address one major project or one major replacement of a system, components, things like that, being strategic about then what else to give attention to or funding to. That is part of the district's planning process. And when you think of, yes, there are finishes that a maintenance individual or maintenance staff could address, it depends on what that is. So when you think in terms of the walls, and when you start walking in a facility, which as I understand it, you all will go to Rooster Springs, for instance. When you start walking around that facility and you start seeing all the dings and the dents and the scratches along the walls, an individual maintenance person cannot realistically spend all their time repainting every single surface in a facility that's 110,000 square feet. So that's when you have to start thinking in terms of, okay, this is a lot of this finish that needs attention, and it needs more attention than just spot painting. So we're going to be strategic, and when we do a large replacement, we're also going to look at the other systems or finishes and maybe include that in that package. So while we make recommendations, ultimately the district will take all those individual line items and come up with a plan that makes the most sense for both their budget, their staff, etc. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, mostly. I guess one of our considerations would be hiring another person in that maintenance role. You know, is it more cost effective than waiting for a large capital replacement? Just hiring another person, it's far easier to hire another maintenance person right now than it is a teacher, I know that, so.
Yeah. That's it.
when it's red, it's on. There you go.
Well, I won't say it as eloquently as our group did earlier, but we had a similar conversation just talking through what's the balance between reparations, cosmetic reparations, and things like that. And I guess that kind of got a challenge that we want to just plant the seed back for everybody too, that when we're talking about going through this layer of facilities, that taking the blinders off, that seeing that the facilities report, remember that there's a student achievement index, there are student success outcomes, there are other things that we're celebrating, and the challenge being, it would be fantastic to see something along those lines related to Rooster Springs performance. You know, the track outcomes, the middle school fulfillment of those things, just trying to really put the narrative together that these are more than just the walls, that these are, you know, springboards about some of the things that are actually happening in the buildings, and there's a direct correlation to what it looks like, how it feels, and ultimately the affect on a family when they live here.
Well, and I will say, I've done a lot of these assessments. I've done them all over the state. I've done them in districts large and small. Dripping Springs does a tremendous job of paying attention to their facilities and coming up with a plan to maintain their facilities so they not only look great for the people who are occupying them, but again, they serve the community in the way that they're supposed to.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Clint. Appreciate y'all very much. All right. So just a couple of reminders as we close out this evening. If you have any Post-it notes with remaining questions that you want to pose to the parking lot, just make sure I get those so that I can get them all together and we can get those answered. So, I always go back to this slide, and I thank you, Kyle. You set it up for me. I love that. But that's why we're here in the room, and I think there is a lot more to think about when you think about the effect and the impact a building has on a child. And when I say child, I'm talking high school seniors, okay? All the way up. They're still children. No matter what, they're still children. And so I think we do have to think about that. And on that note, I've asked Dr. Morris-Kuntz if she would say a few words.
Well, I thought, since you were talking about children, we might want to recognize that we actually have some of our students in this room. So AJ and Evan, if y'all wouldn't mind standing up. If we could all give them a quick round of applause. These are very active students who have a lot of things on their plate, and just like all of you are taking the time to be here, they are taking the time to be here, but then also get to go home and do homework after this. So we want to say we really appreciate them being here because I think they bring a new perspective to this conversation. I appreciate you bringing up the students. It's great to have the pictures of students, but it's especially nice to have their voice in the room, and so we just wanted to make sure that we recognize them and say that we appreciate them. Next meeting, we're going to be on their campus, so I think we'll definitely get some great perspective from them. I think they can tell you about the restrooms. We hear a lot about restrooms needing some repair at the high school, so I think we will get a good perspective from them firsthand when we are touring. So we will see you in a month, February 28th from 6 to 8. Thank you guys for spending your time here with us, and we look forward to spending more time with you next month.